In late October, the state's gambling regulator reached out to the online platform Kalshi, telling them to cease promoting and processing sports wagering in the Empire State, since they were not a licensed sports gambling service like household names such as DraftKings and FanDuel. Kalshi responded, not surprisingly, with a federal lawsuit arguing that they're simply providing contracts that can be traded like other commodities. So, with the State Gaming Commission's actions now on pause, we wanted to explore this larger issue. And to do that, we're joined in the Capitol Press Room by Steve Ruddick, a gambling industry consultant and commentator. Welcome to the show, Steve, and thanks for making the time.
Happy to be on.
Well, for listeners who have never used Kalshi, let alone ever heard of it, can you explain the concept of prediction markets in this context and the range of so-called trades that you can make on a service like Kalshi? Because it's not just limited to sports.
Yeah, the first use case of these were for elections. So you had the Iowa elections market, which has been CFTC regulated for many, many years. Predict it for a while. People might be familiar with that, at least general, knowledge that it exists. Polymarket is a newer one, similar to Kalshi. So these have been around for a long time. For the longest time throughout, it's been used as a research tool. So the Iowa elections predicted they had very specific wagering guidelines that you could do on these are basically for research purposes only. So the predicted one was through a university in Australia. The Iowa one was in Iowa, the University of Iowa. So they have had that utility to them, but Kalshi has really expanded that front. So they sued the CFTC to get election last year for the election market that they wanted was which party will control the House after the election.
And for listeners who aren't familiar, the CFTC refers to the Commodities Futures Trading Commission.
Correct. Yes. So this is they deal with like derivatives and those types of things. Somehow this falls under their purview. And Kelsey won the initial case. They started offering election markets, and then they quickly expanded to basically any election market they wanted to. In January, once the Trump administration came in, it was sort of writing on the wall that the CFTC would be a little more friendly to crypto, to prediction markets, to things of that sort. So they started actually offering sports contracts, and that's where we get into this mess that we're in now. So they were offering sports contracts starting in January. A lot of places cried foul. A lot of sports betting operators licensed in the U.S. cried foul. They've been sued. Massachusetts filed a lawsuit against Kalshi preemptively. A bunch of other states have sent cease and desist letters to Kalshi. And in return, Kalshi has quickly filed federal lawsuits in courts. So you have New Jersey, Maryland, Nevada are the three big ones that are going on. Kalshi, once they got a cease and desist order, they filed for a temporary injunction in each of those circuits. So we have these court cases playing out, which look to be headed at some point to the Supreme Court. Right now, the only other issue is Massachusetts, which Massachusetts didn't send a cease and desist order and instead preemptively filed suit against Kalshi in state court. Kalshi tried to get that remanded to federal court. It got kicked back to state court. So we have all of these different lawsuits playing out on different battlefields. And recently, New York sent Kalshi a cease and desist order, and they quickly filed suit in federal court to have a temporary restraining order put in place. So we're kind of in the same place as the other states that has happened in.
Well, here in New York, we have a state constitution that has pretty narrow description of what type of gambling is allowed. It's one of those things where it outlines what can be done. And we saw back in 2022, the New York State Attorney General's office actually took the daily fantasy sports operators to court, saying that what they were doing constituted gambling. Ultimately, the state's top court decided that wasn't gambling. So I'm curious, when you think about all of the different moving parts that are in play here, could something like daily fantasy sports be a precedent for this type of activity? Is it the fact that this is something that's regulated by the federal government already, something that complicates the state's efforts to intervene? What are some of the legal aspects that you might be focusing on right now?
Kalshi's core position is that as a CFTC registered designated contract market, a DCM, that federal law preempts state laws on that front. So basically, there's the whole case revolves around federal preemption. The overarching question here is in the Commodity Exchange Act, there's a clause about not offering markets on assassination, terrorism, war, and the word gaming is in there. So Kalshi is trying to argue, and they have a legal footing to argue this, that gaming refers to roulette, something of that sort. I know Tarek Mansour, the CEO, has said a few times. He said it's creating risk for no other reason than to bet on it, right? So no one's making anybody play roulette, right? You're choosing to play roulette and then gamble on it. Whereas what they're saying is, well, these games, sporting events, or whatever the prediction market is, whatever the market is, an election, is there going to be a hurricane? All of these things, they exist anyway. So the risk is already it's already included with it. So it's not technically, I think he said the distinction was between betting and gambling, which is a new one for me. I've always thought of those as synonyms, but I've been around long enough in this industry to know that you can, create euphemisms, and they tend to stick around sometimes. Sometimes they don't. Fantasy sports is a great example. You said that, which is I'm not betting on these, I'm entering a contest. That was their whole thing. It was never they refused to use the word betting. Of course, now they're into sports betting,
Sure.
and that's out the window.
Yeah, gambling has always been creative with their definitions. Like here in New York, the sports gambling entities have their servers at casinos, which makes them, physically
Yes.
located there. Or our gambling regulator is the Gaming Commission. But in terms of operations, are there concerns about the integrity of things like Kalshi, both in terms of the bets that I'll call them they're offering, where you mentioned a hurricane, maybe somebody calls it a tropical storm, and there could be disagreements about the outcomes, and then where they're getting their data from. Because when it comes to like elections, for example, they talk about news sources as opposed to what I would turn to as a reporter, which is the Board of Elections, which actually certifies elections. So, how, if at all, have they encountered trouble to date with regards to issues like that? And is that a problem moving forward as they look to expand and be considered more legitimate?
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the big questions if they are greenlit through the legal system, right? If the CFTC continues on its current path, and if the courts side with Kalshi, which is a possibility, we do run into these things. So not recently, during an earnings call, the Coinbase CEO just randomly listed a bunch of what they call mention markets. So on Kalshi Poly Market, it'll be will so and so use this word during the earnings call,
Hmm.
and like that can be a whole bunch of things, Web3 or whatever, and people are betting on this or placing contracts on this, if you want to use their terminology.
I'm okay with you
And
saying betting.
and so the Coinbase CEO, in guess sort of an online trolling kind of way, just ran down the mention markets that he hadn't said yet. So now all of a sudden those are have been said. So how do you settle that? Obviously, it's easily manipulatable, some of this stuff. So I think there is a place if they are legitimized, and right now they are perfectly legal. The CFTC has not said you can't offer these things. They've asked them to take down a couple of markets. In my knowledge, over since January, there were a couple of markets that they said no. So right now they're operating by the letter of the law. It's playing out in courts as to whether that is the case. But I think in the long run, yes, there are some integrity concerns about what is being offered. I know that part of the CEA is also about manipulating markets. There's very strict rules against that type of stuff. So where does that fall? And then you also have, I mean, if you're even talking with the sports betting, you have the NBA scandal where some of the prop bets were easily manipulatable. All you have to do is say, well, I'm sitting out tonight. And you know that you're not technically hurting the integrity of the game on the court because you're not, missing shots on purpose or doing anything of that sort? You're just like, I wasn't going to play tonight anyway. I just didn't tell anybody till the last minute, except for my friends who are going to place bets on my under bets. So I think both industries, whether it's the prediction markets or legal sports betting in the US, need to grapple with the types of markets they're offering at the moment and whether there are some significant integrity concerns with them.
Well, let's say ultimately sites like Kalshi are given the green light to offer sports bets in New York. What does that mean for the existing sports gambling platforms who, for example, pay a very high tax rate compared to what maybe is happening in other states and compared to what I imagine these predictive markets are paying?
Yeah, so that's the billion-dollar question that I don't think anybody has a good answer for. It really depends on where the CFTC draws the line on what you can offer. So right now, Kalshi is offering what looks like parlay bets, right? Like, so you're placing a single bet on three different things happening at the same time. So you're increasing the odds. It's not as vast as what sports books offer. They have a much greater offering. The UX is quite better on licensed sports books, but that can be, that gap can close over time. I've seen a couple of theories on how this plays out. One, I mean, DraftKings yesterday said that they were going to launch their DraftKings Predict. They have a prediction market. They purchased a company called Railbird, which is a CFTC licensed DCM. So now they're going to get into prediction markets, and they said that they're going to start offering sports contracts in the next few months. So right there, it kind of tells you that they think there's a space for both.
Do you think they'll
If
offer them in the states where they are already offering traditional sports gambling, or is this just a way to get into states that may have a prohibition on mobile sports wagering?
right now it's for the prohibited states, right? So it's for states where they don't have licenses and they're not allowed to operate for because it hasn't been legalized. Down the road, so if Kalshi gets greenlit, if they win the court cases, why wouldn't you offer both, right? So you can have your really cool, really innovative tech SGP, single game parlays, and those things on your regular sports book, and you're paying your 51% to New York, your 36% to Pennsylvania, whatever it is, the state tax rate. But those have, 23, 25% hold. So you very high hold products. But then your low hold products, you're just, who's going to win the game, the Celtics or the Lakers, that has maybe a 3 to 5% hold. You offer that through the prediction market because the taxation is different because it's federal. There's a lot of different ways it could play out. And that's all assuming that the customer is into prediction markets. Nobody's really like, yeah, they're gaining some traction, but overall, people, I think, are comfortable with sports books. They understand pretty much how they work. There's a little less of a, barrier to entry for them. And the product's just better at the moment. Yes, prediction markets can close the gap, but as I've said to some people, it's not like the sports betting companies are going to sit on their hands and not make improvements too. So it's kind of like just a game of cat and mouse the whole time.
Well, we've been speaking with Steve Ruddick. He's a gambling industry consultant and commentator. Steve, thank you so much for lending us your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be on. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.